Good afternoon, everyone. It's Tuesday, July 30th, 2024. This is a school board briefing, and the time is 3 o'clock. Sergeant at Arms, has the front lobby been attended to?
Yes.
Thank you. Today, there are 6 items on the agenda. Construction change order report for June 2024, annual instructional materials for 6th through 12th grade health, briefing, and first reading, job descriptions, RSM presentation, public comment, and good of the order or other business. Per board protocol, each board member should strive for 4 minutes for initial comment, 2 minutes for follow-up, with a total of 10 minutes during the discussion. We are going to go ahead and begin with our construction change order report for June 2024. Mr. Scott Rickenbacker will be facilitating this discussion. Welcome again.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. Superintendent Scott Rickenbacker, Director of Construction. This is your June 2024 change order report as required by statute. We currently, on the screen, you can see we did direct material purchases in an amount of $3,843,037.80. The tax savings returned to the district was $223,990.92. Non-direct change orders in the amount of $374,681.28, and the amount was fully returned to the district for that same amount. In contingency adjustments, we had an expenditure of contingency adjustments of $283,017.96, and there was no return back to the district. The two backup sheets this time, we had quite a few to report. You'll see that we had 10 direct material purchase change orders, which we reported. And again, that reimbursed the district $223,990.92 in tax savings. We had 8 pure change orders. Many of these change orders were DMP return money back to the vendor that we didn't expend that tax money, so we have to make the balance sheet back whole again, and then money from projects that was returned back to the district for a net return to the district of $374,681.26. 28 cents, sorry. And contingency adjustments, we had 8 contingency adjustments with an amount of $283,017.96 reflected as being returned back to the district. And just above that tally, I told you $250,000 for moving at Franklin Parks. It was $203,000, so I apologize. There's the cost of that. Moving isn't cheap. Are there any questions?
Superintendent, do you have any comments?
No, Madam Vice Chair, I do not.
All right, board members, any comments or questions? Ms. Jordan?
Mr. Rickenbacker, if the cost for Franklin Park, the moving, that was part of the initial, correct?
That is in the total project cost. It's our owner contingency. We utilize that fund to pay for the moving.
Just want to make sure. Clarification. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good question, Ms. Jordan. Anybody else? Thank you.
Have a good day now.
You too. Next is the annual instructional materials for grades 6 through 12, health, briefing, and first reading. I would like to welcome Dr. Nathan Shaker and Lori Houchin will be facilitating this discussion.
Good morning, Board. Good morning, Superintendent. Good morning, Board. Good morning, Superintendent. Well, actually, good afternoon at this point. I got to get my routines back in. We appreciate you being here today, and we are here to share with you the annual review of our instructional materials related to health. Lori is here to be my institutional knowledge guru. She has been briefing me consistently, and I'm looking forward to everything that I learn from her on a regular basis. My name is Nathan Shaker. I'm the new Chief Academic Officer. Lori is the Director of all curriculum instruction now over K-12. Today's objective, we want to share with you health education state board rules. We want to make sure that you are aware of the instructional materials as related to the K-12 health instruction. And this year we have parent-guardian communication related to K-12 health instruction as well as the permission slips, the forms related to it. We are governed by a number of state statutes. Florida State Statute 1003-42, all instructional materials as defined in 1006-29, used to teach reproductive health or any disease, including HIV/AIDS, its symptoms, development, and treatment, as part of the courses referenced in subsection 5, must be annually approved by a district school board in an open noticed public meeting, which is what we're here for today. Health education, State Board of Education rules by December 1st each year. We submit plans. Three separate plans for our health topics: mental and emotional health, substance use and abuse, as well as child trafficking prevention. And we submit those to the DOE through a portal that we have. By July 1st of each school year, each school district must submit a report that describes how instruction was provided for required instructional topics using the previous school year. We have met both of those reporting criteria. Yeah. We have a number of State Board of Education rules that govern health education. Those are hot links for your review. If you would like to look through Sunshine State Standards, required instruction, everything from high school graduation requirements, HIV, AIDS, and human trafficking. Comprehensive health through the Florida State Statute 10342 covers all of these various topics. There's newer items that have been added this year. This is carried over from last year. The newer items are really on awareness and benefits of sexual abstinence as the expected standard and the consequences of teenage pregnancy. In grades 7 through 12, teenage dating violence is a topic that is now covered. Additionally new this year, we've updated certain health and physical education courses to include revised state academic standards for health education that were approved in July of 2023. There's also new content related to the effects of social media on mental health, as well as resiliency education. These courses will become effective this year in the 24-25 school year. To that end, I am going to turn it over to Lori Houchin, who's going to share with you some of the health instructional materials that we will be using.
Good afternoon. So in addition to new state standards, which we updated all of our scope and sequences and everything, they did also delay the adoption for new health materials until the 2025-26 school year, as they bumped up ELA and reading for in place of that. So you'll see that our materials haven't changed much as a result of not having that adoption year yet. So in grades K-5, they use the Safer, Smarter Kids, and they have the kindergarten lesson has safety rules videos and things like that. And in K-5, the state has kind of backed off of providing materials, so we have our district-created materials that cover substance use and abuse, and we have a scope and sequence for teachers to follow. At the beginning of every school year through School Messenger, we send out a notice to parents in addition to the opt-out forms that we'll talk about, but we send out a notice to parents letting them know about the required health education and how we plan to meet those requirements with their children. For middle school, we use the Teen Health, the 2014 edition, until we go through a new adoption. This is our textbook. And for high school, they also use a different edition, but also the Glencoe Health. Middle school, we're making a change. So in the past, I would say 7 years, the district required that all sixth graders take health. With the changes in standards, we were missing the teen dating violence, which only begins at 7th grade and beyond. So we actually weren't meeting what we needed to. So this year we're going to give schools a variety of ways to be able to cover health. So they can continue to give health in the 6th grade a semester or through peer counseling for the year. But they can also offer health in 7th grade for the semester and or peer counseling for the year, and the same in 8th. They can offer health all 3 years, or they can track, and we'll do that through a course code so that we ensure that students have met that health requirement by the time they leave middle school. In addition, we looked at some of what our other partnering counties do, and they embed health standards into PE courses, much like the High School Hope course. And then some of them are utilizing them in science as well. And health standards have always been in science and have always been in PE. And so we would just ensure that those 14 that are really required by the state would be tackled through those courses. And we are taking the data from the schools as to who plans to give health in which manner, so that when we report to the state, that we'll have that information. In high school, there are no changes to the course offerings. Every student is required to have a credit of physical education, which includes the integration of health. So they do this through HOPE or HOPE in a PE variation, and there are the following waiver options that are allowable if they take a varsity sport, JV, JROTC, marching, band, dance, or they're in an advanced program as well. There are waiver options that are allowed. We are required to offer parents an opt-out form for reproductive health and any diseases, including HIV and AIDS, its symptoms, development, and treatment. And so you're going to find this form everywhere. It is going to be on the parent portal. It is in our scope and sequence. We send this, we follow our scope and sequence, and we send this out again to teachers, reminding them that 2 weeks prior to hitting those standards that specifically are allowable for the opt-out, that parents are receiving this request so that they're able to do that. And then they're not penalized if they decide to opt out. The students would just get an alternative assignment. But we mark it in many places. So now you're going to see it in PE for middle school and in the science. So all of that has been updated so that we make sure that we meet that requirement. And so our next actions is August 6th. There will be an action meeting in which there will be a public hearing on the health instructional materials, and then that will allow you to vote to approve the health materials, which is required by state statute, before students enter into that content. Any comments or discussion?
Superintendent?
Just thank you both for your presentation today, and stand ready to answer any questions of the board.
Board members, any questions or comments? Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Ms. Langford Fleming. Welcome aboard, Dr. Shaker, in your new role, and good to see you, Ms. Houchin, as well. Just a real quick question on slide 9, under Rule 6A-101.09412. Just for the general public, what is your description then of what resiliency education would be?
Resiliency education, and this, I'm not as familiar with those standards, but they will be in Wellness Wednesdays as well, but it is about just letting students understand productive struggle and how to come out of productive struggle. It just is about facing problems and challenges and being able to come out on the other side and be reflective about what you've learned about that as well. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Shaker. Let's try this again. Congratulations for your new role. I actually have 2 questions. Well, one comment. I took all my grandkids and we watched all your films of all ages, so that way I could see if they understood, which they did. So congratulations on that. Even the one coming into kindergarten knows how to say the stop one. We're good. So, but the one with the forms, if a parent does not fill this out, because we always have this problem with, not filling out forms, what then that child would then be taught the class, right? I just want to make sure that that's understood.
It's true. It's not an opt-in, it's an opt-out.
Correct.
So,
Correct. I just want to make sure that that one is clear on.
yes, you are
Okay.
correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Yes, welcome, Dr. Shaker. Thank you. We're being really easy on you this time. Now, just 2 questions regarding 2 of the slides. Is there any situation where a sixth grader would somehow be in a seventh or eighth grade health class, or vice versa, an eighth grader be in a sixth grade class? And the reason why I'm asking this is because of students transferring from, let's say, a private school into a public school, and they're an eighth grader, well, they haven't had sixth grade. How would that work?
So those course codes are by grade level. They're not mixed grade levels, PE sometimes, but even so, they have their own course code. They may have a mixed class, but it's a sixth grade course code, seventh grade course code, eighth grade course code. And so that is something in preschool that we will be training teachers with this new ability to select a variety of measures of help, that there are standards that are only appropriate for, say, seventh grade and above, and that sixth graders would have to receive an alternate assignment.
Okay. And as long as we're holding them accountable, right?
Yes, and it's an excellent cautionary note, because I think PE classes especially, it's the new option that's available to middle schools, will be implementing, and I know during the hot part of the beginning of the year and the hot part of the end, it's sometimes just safer even to be indoors, but making sure that we were very clear about the separation between sixth and eighth graders is important.
Okay, thank you. My second question is regards, sort of piggybacking off Ms. Jordan, if a parent does sign out, and I think you already answered it, but just to make it very clear, let's say a parent does opt out, how is that student receiving that help credit that they have to have? What's their option?
There are plenty of other standards for them to be able to receive, because those are just a few standards, and we have them labeled as to which ones, we have them read, basically, as to which ones are allowable for the opt-out, and there are a plethora of other standards where they can receive grades that they can still receive the full credit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? All right, thank you both.
Thank you for your time.
Next is job descriptions. Angela Montemurano will be facilitating this discussion. Welcome, Ms. Montemurano.
Good afternoon. Today I am presenting you for review. There are two job descriptions that you had received prior to. The first one is the Human Resource Business Partner. This goes along with the HR, Human Resources Transformation that we're looking to move forward in bringing on the Human Resource Business Partner. So that is a brand new job description. The second one is a revision. It's the Assistant Director of Transportation Services, which had some revisions made to that. Any questions from?
Superintendent, would you like to add anything?
No, Madam Vice Chair, I don't have any additional things to add at this time.
Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Ms. Giovanelli?
Thank you. Actually, yeah, how you warm that up, okay. I don't know. Oh, okay, thanks, Debbie. All right, my question is really simple, actually. So regarding the pay grades, and I was gonna send an email asking for that. I am curious what, I know we probably will have it in the Evergreen study, but the different pay grades and what the ranges are, like, you know, like if I could get a copy of that, because I have the scale. I have no idea what each job description, what a grade 12 pay scale is and range, and I would be just curious to see that. I know it probably will come in a study, but I'd rather have it sooner than later. Thank you.
I can make sure that you have that right away.
Thank you. That's all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is the RSM presentation. Matt Blondell, RSM Risk Consulting Manager. Weiss Campbell, also RSM Risk Consulting Supervisor, will be facilitating this afternoon's discussion. Welcome.
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you for hosting us this afternoon. We're certainly excited to present 5 reports to you all today. These reports represent the culmination of a very busy spring for us and for the district, and also represents the conclusion of our fiscal 2024 audit plan. So we're very excited to share those with you. In preparing these reports, we had many, as you can imagine, many conversations with district leadership and with the superintendent, and certainly appreciate the efforts from staff in responding to inquiries, providing documentation, and discussing the observations that we had, because that was several conversations, so certainly appreciate that. As we prepared these reports, our standard process was to, of course, meet with the leadership in each department to go over our observations, obtain management action plans and responses from them, and then we met with the superintendent to review the reports with him. And then at last week's audit committee meeting on Monday, the 22nd, we reviewed each of these with the audit committee as well, and are happy to present them here to you today. So we have 5 reports that we will go through, 3 internal audit reports, which include asset management, employee timekeeping, and fleet operations. And then we'll continue on with the follow-up report, which presents results of our testing related to prior issued audit reports and the remediation measures that have been taken by management since we'd issued those reports. We were able to close many items, and there are still a few that remain open from those prior reports. And then finally, we'll follow our risk assessment, which you'll recall, we met with many of you. We met with the audit committee members as well as leadership and the superintendent to discuss what the audit plan would look like for the next coming year. We presented that to the audit committee on the 22nd meeting, and they recommended 5 areas plus follow-up, but we'll get into a little bit of that as we get to that one. So as the vice chair mentioned, we have Weiss Campbell here with me today. He'll start walking through some of the reports, and then we will get into follow-up and risk assessment as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate everyone's time today. For the purpose of our time, I will kind of go through these at a high level. We have the screen here that highlights the observations. What I'll do briefly is just give you an idea of our scope, and then walk through observations and hopefully answer any questions you might have. So we'll start with our asset management project here. So the primary objective of this project was to look at asset tracking, recording, monitoring, and reporting of assets above the capital threshold. We did have 2 high-risk findings as well as 3 moderate risk findings, and I'll briefly walk you through each of these now. The first observation is in regards to asset additions, specifically supporting documentation for those additions. During our review, we identified 5 asset additions in which key documentation was not retained to support the costs that were entered into the PeopleSoft system. Through conversations with management, next steps, their action plans are to establish standardized documentation requirements for recording of asset acquisitions, and additional training will be provided. Disposal of written off assets is our second observation here. During testing, we identified exceptions related to physical disposal of assets and the documentation retained to substantiate the costs that were recovered. So we noted a lack of process for centrally verifying whether an asset was disposed of following approval by the board, and a lack of guidance on the documentation that's required to support the asset disposal, things like auction receipts or dump tickets. Next steps, management committed to clearly defining the disposal mechanisms for assets that have been written off so that support exists. Again, it's not that we found that there were issues with this, but we are just looking for defined guidance on what is expected to be retained. The third observation is around asset transfer supporting documentation. So district procedures require 2 documents to be retained and completed when transferring assets between schools or sites. This is an MIS 048 form and a work order. So during detailed testing, we identified a sample of asset transfers that did not retain this required documentation, which risks non-compliance with board policy and standard operating procedures, so a lack of an audit trail. Next steps, management is exploring opportunities to digitize these forms to streamline this process and ultimately promote consistency moving forward so that the right documentation is retained to support any asset transfers between sites. The fourth of the 5 is around asset management oversight. So board policy requires a complete inventory of a district site in the event of a change in the inventory custodian at a district site. And this custodian is the individual who's required to facilitate inventories at a district site. Through our procedures, we identify the absence of a formal process for notifying property inventory and records as changes in custodians and designees occur. So if there is a change in a custodian at a site, the expectation is that an inventory will be performed. And what we're looking for here is for management to establish a formal notification mechanism to the property records when that change takes place so that an inventory can be performed and confirmed. So management has committed to establishing this mechanism, and they've incorporated that into their management response. And lastly, to bring kind of this all full circle, standard operating procedures is our 5th and final. While the district does retain standard operating procedures, there is an opportunity to enhance this documentation to define all expectations and guidance. So in our report, we highlight a number of those processes that are currently performed but are not necessarily reflected in this guidance. So management is committed to enhancing their operating procedures to make sure that all key processes are reflected in their guidance. So with that, I'll pause because I know I went through those fairly quickly. Any thoughts or questions?
Board members, any questions or comments at this time? Mr. Fisher?
Yeah, it's actually an administrative question, and it's not for this meeting, but would it be possible to get a overview generally of the assets that are written off that are unable to be located, maybe on like a year-by-year basis, how much that is and how many? Like an inventory?
Yep, we'll go to work on, obviously, the ones that we bring forward to the board table, so we'll take some time to compile information, put together a summary, and then get your reaction if you'd like additional information.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jordan?
To piggyback of what you just mentioned, we receive, it comes to the board, we approve it. But so, and I remember the last one we had, I don't know how many hundreds of buses we had. But so what is that time frame that they have to dispose? I know that they had said that they were tearing it apart to use all the pieces of the buses or whatever, but what is that time frame for them to dispose once we have approved it? Because if you look at the chart, we're at the top of that chart, so we're responsible. So what does that look like once we approve it to be disposed of? When is it gone? Because I don't think that it was on here, like the time frame.
Yeah, I think you might be referring to one of the observations in fleet operations, but you are correct. There isn't an explicit time frame that is outlined in guidance at the moment.
So if I may, so how do we know, and I know that there's like little numbers, but that could come back to us multiple times or be recounted if there's not a time frame for the objects to be disposed of. Just is a possibility. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher?
Just a real quick follow-up for clarification. I just want to see just the big picture. I know what comes before us, but just kind of see aggregated. That's all I know. Thank you.
Mr. Persons?
Isn't there a state statute that says it should be basically timely disposed of and removed? I don't know if there's a exact time frame. I can't remember exactly how that was worded.
Correct. It doesn't specify a specific time frame. It just specifies that it needs to be disposed of timely after approval by the board.
Okay. Continue.
Okay. With that, I'll move to employee timekeeping, our second of the 3 operational audits. The scope of this audit was to evaluate segregation of duties within the employee timekeeping process. We did detailed testing that verified time and attendance information agreed to approved and authorized supporting documentation, verifying that hours paid agreed to supporting documentation, and of course looked at policies and procedures surrounding the employee timekeeping process as well. We did have 4 high-risk findings and 1 moderate risk observation. These observations were largely driven by the district's decentralized timekeeping processes and a lack of defined standard operating procedures, which we highlight here. Through our review, we noted that the district operates 4 different methods for capturing and reporting time based on the needs of the district. And this is not abnormal for districts that we see. At the end of the day, we're trying to meet the unique needs of different district employees, so that's not abnormal. Just trying to give an idea of what we saw and what's highlighted here. Just want to note a decentralized process is particularly concerning when you consider some of the other observations that we have here. We did identify a lack of standard operating procedures within the district that define key expectations, such as documenting evidence of supervisory review, which is what's highlighted through observation 1, as well as expectations for timely submissions of timesheets to provide that employees are paid timely, which is observation 2. Additionally, 3 of the 4 timekeeping methods involve manual data entry into the PeopleSoft system from paper timesheets. This is highlighted in observation 3, increasing the risk for human errors. So we're just highlighting that risk here. Our recommendation was that the district consider identifying ways to centralize and automate timekeeping procedures. We recommended that standard operating procedures be created to define expectations for departments as well as those district sites related to key timekeeping controls, such as timekeeping approval requirements, expectations for timeliness, as well as document retention requirements. Management action plans that are highlighted here in the report do agree with these recommendations, and a commitment has been made to exploring opportunities to centralize components of the timekeeping process, as well as automating timekeeping methods where possible, as well as enhancing standard operating procedures. The last observation here is around PeopleSoft user access. We just highlight that a user access review was performed, which is the key control. There were just some user access that was identified through that process that needed to be changed, and there was issues with the timeliness of making those changes in the system. So we just highlight the need to remediate those user access concerns after it's identified. With that, I'll pause and take any questions you have.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. This report was very interesting to me. I will say I appreciate the management response on this, but after reading observation 1 and 2, I was pulling out what little of my hair was left looking at it, to be honest, because relying on paper records, relying on Google Docs, which is essentially a cloud version of Microsoft Excel, I was just surprised that we're still doing that. And I'm thankful that this report went through this part, and I'm glad to see the management response or doing something about this. But the lack of standardization, that was surprising to me. So I'm glad that we're going to be addressing that. But I just wanted to point that out. That was something that was really, really a large observation to me. So thank you.
My question, if there's no one else, my question is, go ahead, Mr. Persons, then I'll go after you. Did you have something?
We've not really, I believe, had the high and moderate before. Just sort of new there, just said at risk. Or when it says like high, does that mean it's a high possibility of risk, or does it mean there's a high instance of it happening?
So it's a two-pronged approach, and inside the report, one thing we highlight is our risk rating definitions, because that is a good point. It's relatively new to the audit plan this year. The risk ratings help differentiate between the observations so that we can allocate resources efficiently. So really, when we look at high risk, we're looking at high risk not just to the organization in terms of achieving business objectives, but as well as the timeliness for which remediation is expected to take place. So a high risk, from our perspective, is an item that should be reviewed and addressed timely by management. It's a priority. That's, if I can simplify it.
My question is really more for clarification for public. Dr. Savage, can you explain PeopleSoft user access and who uses that and why they use it in the district?
Yeah, sorry, am I coming through? Let me just respond kind of more broadly. So obviously they had noticed that we had multiple means of how we track time and so forth, PeopleSoft being one of those pieces among others. And the challenge of it not being centralized and not having proper controls in place, there was a reason why this was elevated through our risk assessment of an area that we wanted to have better controls in place around this area. And I would say one of the challenges we've had, the different ways that we've gone in trying to track time and so forth with different employee groups, is just that diversity of not having really good quality control in place. And so what that's done is put a tremendous burden manually on our payroll department to do a significant amount of work. And so it's really very fortunate that
really a testament to payroll and what they've done to try to offset some of this lack of the control environment that we need to have in place. It's just a challenge within our system, and that's why you notice it is a high priority. It's not an uncommon one, unfortunately, is what I heard from RSM when they presented this to us, because we're not terribly surprised by these results, but also not just the actual automated mechanisms, but really strengthening our processes that go along with this as well. I think that's a theme you'll see not just in this, but in general, the opportunity to really enhance our standard operating procedures for pretty much any of the areas where these audits findings have occurred, leveraging both the technology that you have available to you, in some cases assessing if the technology is creating hardship within your process. And so this is something that we're just deeply involved in right now. And so just really appreciate the hard work of RSM digging in with our folks. I hope there's nothing that I forgot to mention there in terms of the payroll department specifically, because obviously when you see timekeeping, sometimes the onus is, well, what's payroll doing? When in fact, I would argue payroll, probably the current group, has done tremendous work in order to allow us to not be paying people improperly and so forth, but it's extremely burdensome and labor intensive in order to do that, and it doesn't necessarily have all the proper controls that a good system would, especially if it were centralized and well managed. Is there anything that I am failing to mention on that you'd want to add?
No, I would just echo your sentiment around the payroll team and the lift that they have to kind of meet the organization's objectives through this process. It being a manual process, they take a huge lift in that, and they've done a lot of the hard work through that process.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Giovanelli?
So I know that this has been an issue for quite some time, because we had to go, prior administration had to go to Tallahassee to talk about the timekeeping piece of it. So, and I know PeopleSoft is trying to accommodate and adapt, but does it? Or can that be something that could be universal across the district, or do we have to get a whole new program? Because I think that was the recommendation. If PeopleSoft can't accommodate, they recommended, that we get a program that does. So my concern is, are we going to have to purchase a different program? That's the question. Or can PeopleSoft accommodate, and how soon can this happen? That's my other question, is really how soon.
Well, your question is timely, Board Member Giovanelli, because we're actually have a meeting, I think it's tomorrow, scheduled with our HR, our business services, our information systems, to evaluate just specifically our current PeopleSoft capacities, but also sometimes other enterprise level systems that potentially make sense for us on that respect. We just have a number of functions. I mean, I think it's been talked about at this board table, so I'm going to step away from the timekeeping aspect alone for a minute, just talk in general about the challenges we've had with our enterprise system, PeopleSoft, and the significant level of customization that we did when we adopted the enterprise system. And as the system has been upgraded periodically and so forth, the inability for us to be able to utilize the platform as many other companies do. And I think that's a challenge when you so significantly customize your existing enterprise software where it can no longer be updated without significant manual edits because of the procedural aspects of it that we chose to implement to replicate a prior system, basically the processes that we utilized prior. Now in this case, the timekeeping, it's actually slightly different. There's the leak clock, there's a number of other aspects to it, so I'm speaking more broadly. The challenge with that is then as you update to a new enterprise system, it's very difficult and in some cases not possible. It's no longer feasible for the system to be utilized the way it's designed because your procedures are now incompatible, so you're not able to utilize it. So then there's just a lot of challenges with that. And so for us, it's a balancing act of what could we utilize the system for, evaluate the full functionality of, if it were to be utilized maybe the way that many companies use it, could we then serve that function properly, or does a different platform make sense for us? Can we use one consolidated platform across, or does the challenge of things like transportation, working on a route time mileage, just a fundamentally different means? And that's the challenge. You have different groups that are impacted in different ways in terms of the way that the time is kept. And so it's a very complex challenge, but an important one, and we knew it. But I think this is part of this process as we go through this, is evaluating
the technology, but also ultimately, to me, it starts with really thoughtful procedures. Where are the risks that are identified through an audit like this? What are the current limitations of the technology that you were seeing as evidence through because it's really both. You have to look at both in totality. And so I think this is a great starting point for us. It creates that sense of urgency that we already had, but I think this kind of validates that this was why we identified it as a high-risk area. And so we're grateful for that partnership, and we'll continue to work through it. I look forward to bringing the board recommendations if we find that we want to look at different enterprise software solutions in conjunction with our standard operating procedure refinement work, which clearly has to occur as well.
Thank you. Technology is moving so fast, but is it going to, is PeopleSoft hindering us from the efficiency piece? That's my concern is, because we have employees that are working really hard and, how do we make their life easy? That would be, the efficiency is huge, so, versus, hindering them. Thank you.
Ms. Jordan?
I had a question regarding that. So a lot of this was based on the fact that they were not getting people were not approving their timekeeping, so that they were not getting paid. It was like a delay in payment and everything. And so the management was that they are going to improve, management will document and make sure that this is taken care of, the delay for the time submissions and approvals. And then if this is not taken place, who's the management? The supervisor? So the supervisor's going to correct the supervisor? I mean, who is that? Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, when you see management response, that's us, that's management. I'm management, right? So everyone who is a managerial role for us, those are defined parameters around our team and so forth, and how they do it, all the approvals, any approver, and all those documented steps of how a person approves time, the expedience of it, goes back to what Ms. Giovanelli was saying, the speed. All of these things have some level of workflow that's kind of built into them, but are they efficient? Is there additional risk because of the way it's set up, the way it's configured? That's what I'm saying. Each one of these, you could really go into and do a deep dive in any one of them, as they did, look through each and then test it to see, basically the efficiency of the process as well as the outcomes.
Right, and I get that, but if the management is correcting the management, who is correcting them? That would be the superintendent?
Well, no, I mean,
mean,
yeah, how are we checking it? I mean, I think
Yes.
certain circumstances, certainly like what we have here, but that's a part of your control environment. What are your methods for checking for errors and so forth? Ultimately, payroll plays a pretty significant role, but right now, as I mentioned earlier, they're really taking the heaviest lift of ensuring that errors were not made, and that's why, and they mentioned it in their report, that they did not find an error of someone being paid improperly on that particular case of the tested group. Now, that's just a certain sampling of the group. Maybe had the sampling been larger, they could have. And so I think that's the idea, is we want to mitigate that risk as the best we possibly can by having more efficient controls, all the proper reporting, all the different things that allow us to do that. So, I mean, all fair questions, and again, just a huge opportunity for us to enhance our current approach, but it will take some time to do it. But we're very deeply invested in this because it's important.
Mr. Persons, and we'll move on.
The one thing, because I've looked ahead and been also briefed on this once before, is the standard operating procedures. It's just a huge aspect of this. Every one of these need to be written down so everybody's on the same page, and so that's one of the most important parts of all this. That's all.
Thank you. You can continue.
Thank you. Okay. With that, I'll move to our third operational audit, fleet operations. So the scope of this audit was a review of procedures pertaining to the retirement and disposing of fleet assets. We verified whether routine inspections are consistently performed, evaluated whether corrective maintenance is consistently performed, as well as segregation of duties within the process. We did identify 2 high-risk findings and then 2 moderate risk findings, which I'll walk you through here shortly. The first observation is the fleet vehicle inventory management. So through our procedures, we identified a significant number of buses that were no longer fit for service due to repair costs, mechanical issues, or aging. However, these vehicles are retained on the district property instead of being written off the financial record, leading to an inflated number of operational buses. Management retained that these buses are retained in order to pull spare parts from these vehicles to meet the maintenance requirements of other buses. However, there is not currently a process for monitoring which parts have been taken from the vehicle or what remains. So next, our recommendations was that the district write off vehicles that are no longer suitable for the district's operational goals. If parts on these vehicles are determined to still have a value, our recommendation is the district create procedures for tracking and maintaining these parts to enhance accountability, and management has agreed with these recommendations. The second observation here is around the preventative maintenance, specifically the performance of preventative maintenance. We did identify through detailed testing a sample of yellow fleet and white fleet vehicles that did not obtain preventative maintenance in accordance with the requirements outlined in the regulatory guidance. And just for reference, the Florida Administrative Code drives these expectations for the buses, while the established district standard operating procedures provide guidance for the white fleet. So management has committed to incorporating maintenance requirements into the staff handbook for staff moving forward, as well as develop ongoing training program for all shop personnel to ensure that there is no lapse in maintenance moving forward related to preventative maintenance. The third observation is around manual operating processes. During our review, we did identify key management procedures that are performed that are manual in nature. So these procedures included the completion of paper-based work orders outside of the PeopleSoft system that are ultimately transcribed into the PeopleSoft system, as well as a manual monitoring of parts inventory tracked through an Excel spreadsheet. We did not note any discrepancies, just want to highlight that between the paper work order records as well and PeopleSoft. However, managing work orders as well as the parts utilized outside of the system increases the risk of human error. Management does aim to research and hopefully identify potential software that could enhance tracking and monitoring of fleet and parts inventory, as there may be concerns about whether or not PeopleSoft can serve that capability. The fourth and final is around the completeness of fleet data within the system. We noted during our review that multiple key data metrics were missing from the population of vehicles. Data metrics such as the location of the vehicle model year, VIN number, as well as a number of other discrepancies. Management does have a plan to implement a new process for reviewing and verifying the completeness and accuracy of this fleet data twice a year in August and February moving forward, so that they can make sure that the data set is complete and accurate. I'll pause. Those were the 4 observations we had related to fleet, and I'll answer any questions you might have.
Board members, any questions? Yes, or Dr. Savage, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. I just wanted to highlight an example of a balancing act with procedure. So if you look at the first observation, the fleet vehicle inventory management, one of the practices that shined a light out in the audit was how one of the things we utilize, and they refer to it in transportation as their boneyard, where they take out a decommissioned bus essentially and then take parts off of it. It saves them having the cost of having to procure the part or maintain it in inventory and otherwise use a brand new part. They can utilize parts off of a bus before it eventually gets completely written off and disposed of, even as the bus itself is basically at that status where it could theoretically be disposed. The challenges you see in kind of the management response side of it was putting a detailed process now where they could document that part as it gets removed. Well, imagine, it's a shop repair mechanic trying to take a part that they're going to put in a current active bus to try to utilize that. The efficiency of that process of how will they now take that part they're taking off the bus, document it? Does it have a barcode? Probably not. Is it part of because it was maybe in some cases part of the original vehicle itself, right? And so now they're just repurposing that part. So what would they do to implement a new process? That's something they'll develop. But the point being, what I'm trying to highlight for you is you can have procedures to try to increase the controls, but it goes to your earlier point of efficiency of process. Now you're potentially taking a process that was very rapid and you're doing it maybe for good reason. You're trying to protect the integrity of people not stripping parts and then selling them potentially. You're doing things along those lines, right? So you have to have a control system, but it's a constant balancing act for efficiency. I just want to use this as a good case in point of something that as a practice that not all districts utilize. There was a point to this. Wanted to highlight that for the entirety of the board so that you're aware when you've heard our transportation folks talk about they're utilizing that was an efficiency they were trying to realize, but at the same time it simultaneously created a control from an inventory standpoint issue that they have highlighted and our team is going to be responsive to. But I just thought it was a good opportunity to elevate a practice you've heard a number of times. Thank you. That was my only comment, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Okay, continue.
Okay. The fourth report that we'll walk through is our follow-up testing. So as Matt alluded to earlier, this is our process of going back to previously issued audit reports and verifying whether or not management action plans have been remediated in line with the estimated completion dates that were highlighted in those reports. So what you're seeing here are the 5 reports that we look back on. This included human resources, specifically recruiting and onboarding. We looked at purchasing and procurement compliance, contract compliance, half-cent surtax, as well as purchasing cards. So you can see between those 5 reports, we had 24 total findings with, through this latest round of follow-up testing, 13 open items remain. So we've been able to close 11 items since those reports have been issued through this process. And certainly a number of factors that have contributed to why some of these changes have remained open. Management changes have taken place. Turnover has taken place in some of these key process areas that contributes to some of it, because when new management comes, they reevaluate the management action plans, and that's certainly taken place for some of these. While some of the other reports are experiencing some system changes as well, and that's contributed to some effect as well. I know in the report we highlight the specific reason for why any item is remained open, as well as context for any items that were closed, so that you can get an understanding of how that risk may have been remediated. With that, I'll take any questions you might have related to follow-up.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I thought this was a really good overview of this report. One thing I had a question on, we still have over half of the findings still open. I know the people are different, but we're still going back to 4 out of 5 open findings from HR back from 2021. My question to you guys is it unusual to have findings still back from a few, to be addressed fully to that time length from 2021, so say 2 to 3 years?
So as I think about that report, when we issued that, it was very early in the internal audit life cycle that we had established here at Lee County Schools. And there, of course, is also a learning curve for management to figure out how we're going to make sure that we're staying on top of responding to prior audit findings and things like that. I think as a process matures, typically we would not see findings open for multiple years, but kind of understanding where we are in the timeline and the maturity of the internal audit program here, it somewhat of it makes sense. But certainly, we would hope to have findings closed faster. I'm sure many of you, I see shaking heads and nodding in agreement, and also with Dr. Savage there. So is it entirely normal? No, but it's not also entirely uncommon. I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be significantly different given kind of where we were then and where we are now, and how management is now learning, and the board and the audit committee, we're all kind of figuring this process out together.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Any others? Ms. Jordan.
I just have, for some reason, the word turnover just keeps coming back. We still have to have processes in place that we can make things happen regardless of the people that are there in that place. I mean, I heard that with construction, I heard that with operation. I mean, lately, that's like our favorite word to be, that's out there. But we still have a business to run, we still have operations to run. And so we need to find a way to make these things happen regardless. I'm not saying that to you, but I'm just, regardless of the turnover or who's in those positions, we still have to maintain and continue doing the job that we're here to do. It was just a comment, but thank you.
Any others? Dr. Savage.
Take 2. So yeah, I just have to, I want to acknowledge what Board Member Jordan said, and I think it's a very fair comment, truly, that our job is to kind of try to make ourselves impervious to that turnover, because we recognize that having employees move in and out of the organization, across the organization, is a normal part of our business. I think the challenge, of course, is different leaders, through the time period have had a more or less of a reliance as part of their leadership or management strategy on procedures. So like some superintendents, for example, that is a absolute commitment that procedural documents, a standardized way of having procedural documents, is a commitment that is expected. And then in others, it's nope, there's a balancing act. That's not, I know how to do it and that's good enough. The problem, in schools, we find the same thing. When you go to a school, if they don't have a manual that they operate off of, then sometimes it becomes, you ask so-and-so, and then so-and-so has the answer. What happens if so-and-so leaves? And then when you're in a district of our size, I think one of the things we've mentioned is that as we grew as a district as well, that there's that scaling up, that you mature to a point where this, I will just use a contrast of specifically germane to this comment, follow-up testing and so forth. When I went to work for the State Department of Education and I was asked to take on, temporarily helping a bunch of different bureaus, the very first thing they did was give me the audit reports, which were cyclical audits that showed how the different issues, which ones were repetitive, which ones had closed. What that gave me in an immediate piece was what were the highest priority threats and issues within that particular piece. And it's done at all the state agencies. But for me, that was the first time I'd ever seen the way audits were utilized as a major opportunity for organizational improvement, because it clarified for management which were the areas that really are the big priorities, where are the hard to fix problems, and it allowed you to kind of dedicate resources and strategy around those core pieces, but it was done repeatedly. When you see the May 21 is why that date, what's the gap there? Well, it's because we didn't have a board auditor for part of that time period. We didn't have RSM. We didn't have that process where they're going in and doing the repeat testing right away. And so there maybe isn't that same sense of urgency that this is a clear problem that we're trying to fix. Because what I will say beyond just what you have here is we are trying to fix procedural elements across every aspect of the organization, every department there. And that's what I have told them in a lot of my work with them as well, is these are the ones you know about today. The next department that you see, you may very well find standard operating procedures or deficit as well. So I think that's one aspect of it. The secondary aspect of it is that the leadership, Einstein has a famous quote of that you cannot fix the problem at the same level of thinking that created the problem, right? So the challenge there becomes, if under management we are experiencing these issues with the procedures we've developed, then what's the guarantee that the same people who developed their level best will be able to fix the problem that in some way they participated in creating by lack of thoughtfulness of the process design. So I think there's those aspects that are a challenge as well. And so I think as leadership, it's a constant opportunity for us to really review it, but I appreciate the board. That's why I'm very candid with this type of response, because this is a huge lift of work for us to organize our procedures. You saw how hard it was with Neola adopting the policies. The procedures that we have in the organization number many, many thousands more than that. So just imagine the time and effort it takes to then update that across the entire organization. It's just very, very challenging.
Ms. Giovanelli?
So my concern is, for example, some of these go back to 2021. Yes, we didn't have an auditor at that part of that time, but I think we need an update, because we're doing all this, we're having all these audits done, and if things don't get corrected, now here we are in 2024, almost 2025, and we still have 4 open in the human resources. So now it's time to start on that audit, to audit the audit that was done. I mean, to have a new audit done. So the efficiency, again, is an issue that we need to be addressing. I think we need an update, what finding was closed and what findings are still open. I mean, at this point, and I don't have this, I was looking, I don't have this actual information in this PowerPoint, so I would love this information to keep track.
It's in there.
I'm on BoardDocs. I don't have that. I couldn't find that.
This PowerPoint, Ms. Giovanelli, to your point, this PowerPoint was not provided to us, but all of the findings are in our board docs. The actual PowerPoint.
Oh, I got you.
I'm
Okay,
sure
thank
someone can email that to you if you need it.
Yeah, I had the individuals, yes. But I didn't see this. This is what I'm saying. But my point is, this is accountability piece. How are we going to follow back up to make sure that the findings that are still open gets closed? I mean, I appreciate the ones that are, that are on here that are closed, and I appreciate that. But I mean, this is our job right here. So what are we going to do to make sure that things are being addressed when we spend the money for the audit, but then what happens after that? I feel like nothing. Sorry, but I feel like nothing.
Mr. Campbell, did you want to say something or insert at some point?
Sure. So as this process has matured, you'll find that what we'll bring to the board's consideration going forward for the next audit plan, and then of course every year after that, would be to continue to conduct follow-up on an annual basis. We did follow-up this year. I think the last time we done follow-up was at least 2 years ago. And so by establishing an annual cadence of checking back on prior audit findings, it starts to drive a little bit more accountability for management because they know we're going to be coming back. They know we're going to be asking these questions. They know this discussion is going to happen at the board level. And so part of that is this function getting to its full maturity level, which we're driving towards. And like I said, part of the discussion that we had with the audit committee is certainly in line with our recommendations is to have this follow-up that's being done on an annual basis so that there isn't as much time lapsing between the issuance of the report and when we come back and look at it.
Thank you. Dr. Savage, did you have a follow-up?
Just that part of the obligation in the plans you'll see is there's dates and so forth set forth in action. It's all in writing. It's all publicly available. It's here for you all. And that is something that you're always able to ask of management. So you can say, because I'm management, right? That's all the folks on our side. We are that operational piece. But part of your accountability is making that transparent for you. So you can say, well, it said that you'd have this done by December 23rd. I'd like to have a board briefing this. I'd like to put it in our board member one-to-one. I'd like to have it in the board weekly. What's the current finding of that? Because it's there, it's memorialized. So that creates that additional accountability. That's, as an oversight body, this is your lane. This is precisely the kind of work you do. This is the partnership of this triangle of my job is to actually ensure that we're carrying these things out. Your job is to look over that from an oversight standpoint. Their job is to independently be able to elevate. This is what we saw. We tested. This is what we looked at. This is what we did. They had an opportunity to go back and forth in case we think it's a misunderstanding on their part. But in this case, what we've done is we're all kind of aligned in terms of what we're seeing, what they're seeing. We're not contesting their findings. We're saying absolutely, and that's the accountability in action. I think you have this documentation. I encourage you, especially in light of the comment was made earlier about elected superintendents. The reality is you've contemplated having a board auditor. That's something we've posted and so forth. You have a board auditor presently in RSM and those extended services that you're seeing, and you're seeing the work product that is kind of highlighting that they're doing their job. They're elevating it for us. You have the information in front of you to be able to say, management, this is how management is trying to hold themselves accountable by having in the action plan setting, you'll often find specific deliverables, dates, who's responsible, things of those nature, depending on the nature of what those findings are. They're designed to create an ease of accountability so that you have that ability to see it and ask those questions of management. I don't know if there's any other way I can describe it. I'm trying my best.
Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, so I would like to see a list of all of the open items. I'd like to see the superintendent's timeline for closing those. And I think there should be a quarterly report. Doesn't have to be a briefing or a workshop, but just a quarterly report saying, where are we? Because they've been open too long. It's one thing if they were recent recommendations, but I really think that we have to have some discipline in terms of oversight, and we don't have it now. And that's the only way we're going to get it. Thank you.
Ms. Giovanelli.
In, no offense, RSM, but maybe this is where the in-house auditor would help with this, that we need, and I think we need, I know that the advertising is out, am I correct for that position? And what is an update on that? Do we have any?
I wasn't prepared to give an update yet on this
Okay.
time. I would hate to speculate on it,
Okay.
but I'll be happy to see, what level of applicants, things we're clearly, that's something I know there's interest. I'll be happy to get that information for the board in this weekly as well.
Perfect. But I think that would help an internal auditor would help RSM with these updates and working collaboratively together to get some of these off of our list, because I am concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, to your point, Ms. Giovanelli and Ms. Morgan, the thing that popped out to me were these P-card issues. And so when you're talking about in-house something, I'm almost like, okay, all of a sudden, June 23rd, we've got these findings, there's 3 still open. And then to your point about protocol procedure, we obviously have policies about our P-cards. And the recommendation is that records are kept and reconciled, and as soon as someone maybe leaves the district, what happens with the P card, everything there should be checks and balances and all that. I was under the impression we do this already through our procedural and protocols. So I love the recommendation, but are we not following this already?
Board Member Langford Fleming, I just want to make sure which specific area that I have.
I'm looking at the P card, like the
The P card.
purchasing cards. I was under the impression, we had a discussion regarding this quite some time ago when we were going through our Neola policy. Somebody brought it up, and I was just under the impression we already follow this procedure, even though it was a recommendation from RSM. I just want to make sure we are following this recommendation. I thought we already did this, I guess I should say.
In which observation, I'm sorry?
I'm on page 28, if that helps you.
28, yep, observation 2, banking system limitations?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I was reading through this,
Yeah.
it just stuck out to me because I assumed we already follow this.
From my recollection, this one had to do with limitation of the Truist system that we were using, and that they had to elevate it to the vendor on that piece. I'd have to work to follow up to find out if anything has changed since what is responded here, but we'll certainly get that, because it was a limitation with, I believe, within the actual system that we were utilizing, as opposed to something that we could directly control on our end. So I think that's something I just want to make sure. I know we did engage with the vendor specifically on it, but I would need to get the specifics of it, if it's been resolved at this point or not at this point.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Yes.
And if I can just add some clarity, because I have the P card open here. So in the body of the report that's attached to the agenda, it does highlight, there was a few reasons why some of these three items remain open. The first is what Dr. Savage referred to, the Truist banking system. So through our observation, what we highlighted was there's an opportunity for them to utilize the system to identify audit capabilities such as who reconciled and approved transactions. So the system didn't, as it was currently designed, did not identify that. So that was a gap. That was something that we had recommended. They worked with Truist to identify that. So through conversations with Truist, they actually did identify 2 new audit reports that they're now using. They don't necessarily meet what we were looking for specifically, but they're continuing to work with Truist to understand how they can get that incorporated. So that's ongoing while they work that out. They are also in the process of performing an analysis of P-card thresholds, which is one of the other items that remained open. That process is ongoing, and it's estimated to be completed in June. So that we expect that to be ready for us to test during the next round of follow-up, assuming that is something that's part of the next scope of work. We did identify some exceptions as well related to the P-card policy and travel documentation, and that is why one of the other remaining items remains open. So until we identify no exceptions, that item will remain open until it's fully remediated. Just for context, that's the reasons why those items are open.
Thank you. Yes. Ms. Jordan.
Was that correct, what you just said? It's going to be completed in June of 2025?
No, June of this year. So when we started
we're
this
in July.
process, yeah, we are. But when we started this process months ago.
Okay.
So when we went through that, they had a projected date of June.
Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you.
All right, continue.
Okay. Well, with that, we will transition to the risk assessment, and Matt will walk us through that.
All right. I hope all of you remember our meetings that we had a few months ago where we met with each of you as the board members to discuss your concerns and perceived areas of risks in order to inform us of the next coming audit plan. As it had been a few years since we'd addressed the risk assessment, and we had tackled many of the items on the prior top 10 list, and so it was an effort to update our risk assessment and to prepare a new list for the board's consideration. As I mentioned, we met with each of you. We also met with the superintendent, many members of district leadership, and then use that information in combination with our work at many other school districts in Florida and what we're hearing at other meetings like the Florida School Finance Officers Association and other internal audits that we do throughout the state and of course in consideration of prior audits that we've done here and so forth to combine this list of, or compile this list of the top 10 areas for consideration. So in the full text version of the report, we go into some examples of why these areas are risky and what our intended approach could possibly be. We discussed each of these 10 items with the audit committee in the meeting on the 22nd, and the audit committee had recommended 5 of the areas plus follow-up, as I had mentioned earlier. So we are in the process now of developing more fully developed and defined approach and scope for those 5 areas, which include budgeting, capital planning, the cybersecurity incident response, facilities maintenance, and grant management. Those were the 5 areas that the audit committee had recommended that we further define in a scope. Our historical process with the audit committee and the board has been to take that recommendation, develop full scopes, discuss that with the audit committee, and then ultimately bring that whole package to the board for the complete scope, the budget, for the board to decide which items to proceed with. So I mean, I'm certainly happy to talk about any of these in more detail, and certainly happy to present these when we do eventually bring them to you all in a future meeting.
Any follow-up questions? Mr. Persons?
Yeah, I just get a lot of, and I'd mentioned this at the audit committee, a lot of emails on the exceptional student education, the ESE. Are we meeting their needs? I don't know, is that something y'all can audit? I mean, because you'd almost have to go to the contract, their plan, and then to the parent and everything else. Or is that something we should be looking into internally? I don't.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think from our perspective, this audit would be compliance driven. So we'd be looking to develop a program that would evaluate compliance with the development and implementation of the IE plans. So we would do that on a sample basis. And I do just want to highlight, through this risk assessment process, we did look at the Florida Education Finance Program, the FTE student enrollment audit that's performed by the Florida Auditor General, the latest one issued in 2022. They had minimal issues concerning ESE services, but obviously FTE drives considerable amount of funding, so making sure that that's accurate was something we wanted to consider. But this was something that was prevalent through our interview conversations. It's clearly a risk that's prevalent, considering the importance of making sure services are being provided in line with expectations with these plans. So we would be looking at it through a compliance lens, and we certainly can evaluate that. But that would be the extent. We wouldn't be looking at the appropriateness of the plans themselves. That's not our lane, right? And we want to stay in our lane, but compliance is how we would approach this.
Follow-up. I mean, I personally would like to see all these done, but we can't do them all in 1 year. So I just wanted to throw that out as a possibility. But after you finish your report and present it or whatever, I guess we would pick the top 5, I think is what we were talking about, or 4, I can't remember.
So the audit committee identified 5 of the 10 that we've highlighted here for recommendation ultimately to the board. So what we would do to expedite that process is develop a more detailed scope of work so you can have a better understanding of exactly how we would approach each of these 5 areas. So assuming you agree with the 5, we can proceed with developing a scope, and you can determine within the board whether that's the appropriate approach.
Okay. I know you did 4 last year, that's why I was sort of, but then you also did the Riverdale.
Correct,
So
yeah,
that
4 is
worked
part
out
of
to
the.
be 5, so
Correct.
you're capable of that. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher?
Okay. Something about those people down there.
Yeah. Is this the last part of the presentation? So I just wanted to give just a couple thoughts real briefly, and Mr. Persons brought this up as well as Dr. Savage. I mean, in reviewing all of this, the biggest thing that kept coming up are the SOPs. Like across the board in any of these areas is the lack of some of these departments having the standard operating procedures, having that and being able to flow that, as well as, so we don't have, making sure that we have redundancy, cross-training, and no gatekeepers. I felt like that was the common thing that kept coming up for that. So, and I think part of this is just the evolution of the size of this district going from, so smaller family to now a large size school district. I think these are some of the growing pains I've noticed, but those are things that really stood out to me, and I just want to say I appreciate these audits. They were very insightful, so thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
So in response to what you've said, that's great. I just recalled that Neola also has protocols that go with all of their policies. Now, in talking with people, I understand that those protocols are not fully fleshed out, but they are a backbone. I mean, it's not like people can, need to start from scratch. I mean, we really need to take a look at processes in place that have been formalized, and where there's, where we differentiate, or where we're at some other place, that's fine. But I mean, my sense has been, since I came in this district, there are no written documents governing most of the procedures in this district, which is a huge problem, as we've said, when you have people moving in and out. And yeah, anyway, that's my thought. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond, I really share a lot of your concern, Ms. Morgan, about the lack of overall written procedural documentation, and then the time it takes to actually produce that from scratch, or for the update something that, when I first came to ops, for example, I had to go all the way back to 2010 to find the basic essential documentations of when we build a new school and the handbook that goes along with it, right? And so that just gives you a sense of how many procedures were really not in writing, and then when they were, they needed to be updated and so forth. And so again, it goes back to that leadership culture of, is our way of work defined by procedures? How do we know them? How do we train them? How do we optimize them? When do we review them? I had very high hopes with Neola as well, because Neola, what I found as we dug into it a little bit was that while the policy side of Neola was pretty thoughtful, it gave, in some cases, vague versions, more highly detailed versions, more procedural-oriented versions. So as you were going through and trying to migrate, you could pick, I'm going to pick a policy that is more prescriptive. It really gets down to the procedural level. Or, no, we want to keep it vague because we have great procedural documentation to go across from that. The challenge that you have is, while in Neola, the naming convention, a lot of times those procedures were born out of the policy side. So you had a policy, and then you had a complementary procedure that goes with it, so dovetails. So when that happens, they're naturally designed that way. They're named accordingly that way, and in some cases even have forms. The challenge is, as I mentioned earlier, there are so far more procedures than there even are policies. So while we have board policies to govern a lot of what the board and what we're obligated to do by law, things that we want to try to have that board focus of, this is how we know it exists, the challenges that administratively, our procedures number far, far more than anything close to the amount of policies that we have. And so while you have the ones that dovetail nicely with your policies, it's even bigger than that. And so then just how do we have it? The advantage we looked at with Neola was having a consolidated way that you could search, knowing that all of them live in one shop. Through my administrative career in this district, we've had the full gamut. We've had where there was a person over policies and procedures, where it was a specific person who was kind of like the procedural czar, who essentially and it was all on templates where you utilized a standardized form. You tried to teach people in that level. That was kind of one extreme. And then you had others where every department could have it their own way. They could be on their website. They could be on what used to be called the Learn page. They could be on a shared document. It could be literally in paper, and nothing is digital. And so you just had that full range. And I think it goes back to Mr. Fisher's comment of a growing district, that when you see it in evidence in the payroll, you see it in evidence, all these other elements. As you grow in size and scale of operation, you have to have standardized ways of doing business. How else do you provide the assurance that things are being followed properly? So I just wanted to give voice to those things. It's a body of work we're engaged with. I think the advantage you have with an elected superintendent potentially, having worked with some of them when I was at the state level working with them, is that you in some cases get stability of leadership and leadership expectation that doesn't change, because you have 4 years in theory for a term to do that. And so there is that opportunity, but is that superintendent candidate, the one who gets selected, do they have that same passion for process? Because that's what we've seen, is that you had different superintendents who had a clear passion for seeing process documents come forward. And if that wasn't a part of the expectation, then in some cases that was never done. And so I will just say that I've worked for a number of superintendents, and none of them were identical in how they approached the expectation of a process document. In some cases, they found it burdensome. They found it, that it wasn't good enough. They were too step-by-step, was too in the weeds, that people know what they need to do. So you just have all the different iterations of it. So I just wanted to give voice to that. And I appreciate the board's sentiment on that. Anything that the board feels, I'm happy to hear it. but I just wanted to give you that additional context based on Board Member Morgan's comments. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too, thank
for
you.
your time.
Are we picking are we giving a direction?
Ms. Giovanelli, did you want to follow up? Attorney,
May I ask
yes.
a question? Uh-oh. I have a question. What are the 5 again that you're going to actually draft the scope on?
Sure. So the first was budgeting. The second was capital planning. The third was cybersecurity incident response. The fourth was facilities maintenance. And the fifth was grant management. And then in addition to those, another annual follow-up.
So is this the opportunity for the board, if they want additional scope drafted, to be able to advise you?
Absolutely.
Or change, or make a different decision based on the others that are listed?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Would anybody like to recommend what their next follow-up step is, or besides the 5? Ms. Jordan? Or Ms. Giovanelli? Ms. Giovanelli?
Well, I was just going to piggyback off of what Mr. Person said. I think I have teachers telling me that we're not doing things right with the ESC students. So I would consider that a very important. So if we want to add it to it, or, you know, they'll do a timeline. So I think that's something that should be sooner than later. So.
Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I will have to agree with that. ESC is definitely a high priority for myself as well. And I think we've already, maybe I'm mistaken, maybe I just think we've done this. Cybersecurity, did we not already do an audit on cybersecurity?
We did an initial high-level cybersecurity risk assessment and presented the results. This would be a more detailed review, specifically diving into incident response.
Okay, and then facilities, I think we did one on that as well, right?
Facilities maintenance has been on the risk assessment plan since we came here. We've
beginning.
never touched it. RSM has never touched it.
Oh, okay, I just know that's been brought up before as well. So, yeah, it would definitely, ESCs would be a priority for myself. Thank you.
So board, is it safe to say we can add that to the list of priorities and have them follow up? I'm getting a thumbs up. Yes? Okay. Wow. Anything else would you like to add to the list? Mr. Persons?
I mean, the list is getting a little bit big. That's the problem. Of all of these, I mean, I've always wanted to get into budgeting, so I would love to keep that, obviously. I think capital planning, we're not in a bad shape right now. I mean, we're 5 years out. I mean, I don't know. Can you give us like a brief scope of what you would look into in capital planning? Or I'm just trying to see if there's one maybe we could put off a year.
So while Weiss is pulling the more detailed information up, I would just say, you know, we're happy to create detailed scopes for the board's consideration for any and all of these areas. And then, of course, when we come back to the board, you all would then vote on which ones to proceed with for the current year or for fiscal year 2025. And then if you wanted to push one off to the next year, we could certainly look at that. And that'd be where your opportunity to kind of pick and choose which exact items would be included in the plan for this next year.
And that'll include pricing as well, so that's an important consideration as well, to Matt's point. Just to highlight capital planning, what our approach would be there. So we would be evaluating the process for identifying and prioritizing capital improvement projects, the process for monitoring and reporting project progress, performance, and outcome, the stakeholder engagement that's in place for the planning process, and of course compliance with state and federal regulations within that process.
Yeah, I'd just, like I say, just add the ESC services to it, and I'm happy with that right now. And then we can choose later, in my
I
opinion.
agree. Do we have a consensus there, Mrs. Morgan? Okay, thumbs up. Do you have your direction? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Next is public comment. Attorney Dupay Bruno, please address public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. School board policy provides the opportunity at this point in the meeting to address the board concerning any matter on this meeting's agenda. If you completed a public comment card, please provide it to the staff. Public comment will be held at the podium in the center aisle. Please be advised that the board will not respond during public comment to remarks made by speakers. However, at the conclusion of public comment, the chair or superintendent may respond. Speakers who fail to follow proper decorum in the chambers will be ruled out of order. Any speaker continuing with such remarks will be required to relinquish the microphone per Board Policy 0169.1 and may be removed from the chambers. There will be one warning. Per Board Policy 0169.1, the time per speaker is 3 minutes if there are 20 speakers or less. You'll find a countdown on the big screens in the front of the room. Once your time has elapsed, the microphone will automatically shut off. Please state your name when you approach. And I just want to remind speakers that this is a briefing, so public comment is limited to the items that were presented today, such as construction change order, annual instructional materials for 6 to 12, health, job descriptions, and the RSM presentation. Madam Chair, there's one speaker who would like to address the board.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
Mr. William Bronson.
Hello, thank you, and appreciate this time. I'll be brief. There's two things I wanted to bring your attention to. One has to do with retention, teacher retention. And our organization, I'm William Bronson, president of Enlighten Education Co-op.
Mr. Bronson, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do either of your topics have to do with anything that was on today's agenda for the briefing?
When I downloaded the agenda items for public comment, there were a list of a number of things, including teacher retention.
That's
and
on.
So my first point is addressed to that.
Okay, I believe that is for tonight's action meeting.
Yeah, there's an action meeting tonight at 6 p.m. That's probably what you downloaded that had all of the multiple items. That action meeting, you're able to talk about anything that's on the agenda or anything else that affects the operation of the school district. This is a briefing, and the only thing that could be addressed at the briefing and a public comment are the 4 topics that were discussed today. So construction change order, the annual instructional materials for 6th to 12th grade health, job descriptions, or the RSM presentation. That's it.
So you're saying I can address the role of our organization in terms of helping with staffing issues?
You can address it tonight at 6 p.m. at the action meeting. That's open for anything you want to discuss that relates to the school district, but not at this.
So this would have to be discussed tonight after, and is that a early item on the agenda or public comments?
So we'll have public comment at the very beginning of the agenda. So before all of the
Okay.
other things are even discussed, you'll have an opportunity.
So come back at 6 o'clock, you're saying?
Thank you.
Okay. Will do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, that concludes public comment.
Next up is good of the order. Board members, do you have any comments? And I will start with Mr. Fisher.
No, I'll hold my comments until tonight. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Giovanelli.
I'll be real quick. I sent an email regarding fresh food presentation from Southwest Florida, or Southwest Food Service Excellence. They're asking to do a food presentation here for us. I've sent it to the superintendent. I copied you in. They will come and do feed us fresh food. We get to sample it. So they've asked to do a presentation. You don't have to comment now. I just wanted to make you aware of the email and see if that's something. I don't know if it has to be at a public meeting or if it could be at another time, and how that would work, the details. I let her know that the chair and the superintendent would have to schedule such. So FYI, that's it. And that's it. Thank you.
Ms. Jordan?
I'll just hold mine until later this evening. Thank you.
Mr. Persons?
Not at this time.
Ms. Morgan?
I have one, and Ms. Montemorano is here, so I can make this comment. You weren't here earlier. I promised her after our last meeting that I would apologize to her and her staff because I made some comments about the absence of fidelity to the administrative appointment process, and I left a very negative impression with respect to not following that process. And I want to make clear to staff that from my point of view, every posting done by HR will be followed with fidelity to the employee appointment, to the appointment process, so that we can ensure transparency, fairness, and equity. So I just wanted to be clear that I have absolute confidence in the operations of the HR department with respect to employee hiring, et cetera. So those are my comments. Thank you.
I do not have any comments at this time, but I did want the public to know that Ms. Patrica, in her absence, is dealing with some personal issues at home, so I wanted the public to know that is why she is not here, so our thoughts are with her and her family at this time. Attorney DuPay-Bruno.
I have no comments, thank you.
Superintendent Dr. Savage.
Madam Vice Chair, I don't have any comments either. Thank you.
All right, tonight we will have a board special meeting at 5:05 PM, followed by a board action meeting at 6 PM. At this point, having no other business to come before this body and seeing no objection, this meeting is adjourned. The time is 4:30 PM.